The rain hammered against the window, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the tension in the room. I had just settled into my usual chair when the doorbell rang, a sound that didn't belong in the stillness of the night. She walked in, her silhouette outlined by the dim streetlight outside, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on her shoulders. Without a word, she handed me a piece of paper, her fingers trembling. I didn't need to read it to know something was wrong. Her eyes said it all. There was a secret buried in the heart of the city, and she was about to lead me straight to it. But the closer I got to the truth, the more I realized some secrets are better left buried. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Visitor. It was a gray Tuesday morning when the doorbell rang, at the precise moment I was staring at my watch, wondering if I'd be able to get through another hour of observing the immovable genius that is Nero Wolfe. The office was still, the only noise coming from the steady hum of the refrigerator in the corner, which Wolfe insisted on keeping stocked with his beer, though he hadn't so much as touched a bottle in years. I was sorting through the files, one of his personal projects he had yet to assign to me, when I heard the faint, almost imperceptible chime. I glanced at the door. No one came to see Wolfe unless they had a reason. His reputation, while formidable, was more a product of a sharp mind and sharper tongue than any grand gestures of welcome. He preferred isolation, and in return, clients preferred to seek him out for matters of delicate discretion or peculiar significance. "Archie," Wolfe said from his armchair, without looking up from his books, "answer the door." I sighed. There was no point in arguing. He had a knack for sensing when I was close to breaking free from the monotony. "Yes, boss," I muttered, heading for the door. The woman standing there was tall, with dark, almost unnervingly intense eyes. She wore a green coat that looked far too rich for this part of town, and her scent, faint but unmistakable, was that of expensive French perfume. Her hair was pinned back in a severe bun, yet even so she radiated an aura of restrained elegance. "I'm Diana Travers," she said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "I need your help, Mr. Wolfe." "It's about the relics of the unseen." I let out a breath. Not exactly the sort of case that knocked on our door every day. Wolfe, from his chair, peered over the top of his book with that indifferent gaze of his lips curling ever so slightly as he considered her. "Relics of the unseen," I echoed, stepping aside to let her in. I took in her appearance, well-heeled, purposeful, and wondered what exactly could bring a woman like her to seek Wolfe's services. "Come in, Miss Travers," I said, ushering her toward Wolfe's sanctum. "My boss is not one for formalities, but we're very good at getting to the point." She entered, her eyes never leaving Wolfe, who had yet to make any indication that he was actually aware of her presence. Diana Travers was clearly not one for hesitation, and as soon as she took a seat across from Wolfe's desk, she launched into her story with precision. "The Morningside Museum," she began, "has been experiencing unusual occurrences, and I'm afraid they've escalated. Artifacts have gone missing, or perhaps not missing." She hesitated for just a moment, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. "They're moving on their own." Wolfe didn't respond immediately. He simply folded his hands over his round belly and leaned back, as if allowing her to stew in the silence. "Go on," he said, his voice low, commanding, yet full of that characteristic disinterest that made everyone else nervous. "There have been disappearances, strange accidents among the staff, and rumors of dark forces," she continued. "The worst part is that the objects themselves are changing. One of our most significant items, an Egyptian relic, was recently found on a completely different floor, hidden under a pile of broken glass. No one knows how it got there. The same has happened with several other pieces, and it's only a matter of time before something truly terrible happens. Something terrible? I repeated, arching a brow. You mean people are being hurt? She nodded. Several staff members have already been injured in what we thought were accidents. But now, I'm not so sure. I believe someone is trying to manipulate the artifacts, and the only person who can help me is Nero Wolfe. Wolfe didn't move. He just stared at her, his face unreadable. His cigar smoke curled around him in the dim light as if he were a man emerging from a fog of thoughts that few could understand. Relics of the unseen, he muttered, the words rolling off his tongue like something long forgotten. Tell me, Miss Travers, what exactly are these relics? She hesitated, glancing briefly at the door as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. They're artifacts from various ancient civilizations. Some have never been properly studied, others, their origins are untraceable. The ones that are missing, they're connected by something more than just history. I think they're linked to something far more dangerous than any of us realize. I leaned in, intrigued, despite myself. Dangerous how? She looked at Wolfe, then at me, before speaking in a hushed tone, as if afraid the very walls might be listening. There are rumors, old ones, that some of the artifacts possess powers. Powers that have been lost to time. Powers that could be deadly. Wolfe slowly placed his cigar into the ashtray, his eyes now gleaming with the sharp focus I had come to recognize only when he was on the scent of something interesting. Powers, he repeated. Explain. Not the sort of powers that one can touch or feel. Not easily explained, Diana's voice faltered again, but she steadied herself. More like influence? A subtle, dangerous influence. Wolfe's fingers drummed on his armrest. He didn't like it when things were vague, when the pieces weren't neatly arranged in front of him. But even so, there was something about her presence, her story, that seemed to spark something in him. Tell me, he said, his voice now laced with that familiar edge. Who is it exactly? Who you suspect might be behind this? Diana's eyes hardened. I don't know. I've considered every possibility, the staff, the curator, even the board members. But the more I dig, the more I find myself lost. And the museum director? She trailed off, unsure how much to say. The director? Wolfe asked, his curiosity piqued. Yes, but it's not just him. It's everyone involved. In the collection, I'm afraid. There's something insidious about it all, and I don't know who I can trust anymore. Wolfe's gaze softened. He studied her with the precision of a man who had already solved half the case in his mind. You'll trust me, Miss Travers. I assure you, I will find the answers you seek, but be warned. He leaned forward, a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. In this case, what you seek may not be what you find. The weight of Wolfe's words hung in the air like a thick fog. Diana, her hands still trembling, knew she was no longer in control of the narrative. She had come to Wolfe for answers, but in doing so, she had unknowingly stepped into a game far more intricate than she had anticipated. As the door clicked shut behind her, I turned to Wolfe. What do you think? Wolfe exhaled a plume of smoke and smiled slightly. I think, Archie, that the relics of the unseen are merely the beginning. Was this my life now? Chasing ancient artifacts and cryptic threats? I'd known Wolfe had a knack for unraveling mysteries, but this was something else entirely. Chapter 2. The Archive of Shadows. The rain was steady and unrelenting as I made my way through the labyrinthine halls of the Morningside Museum, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. It was a somber Tuesday afternoon, and Wolfe, never one to do things by halves, had decided that the best way to begin our investigation was with a thorough look at the museum's archives. As always, I followed his lead, the weight of the case pressing down on me like a heavy fog. I'd thought about Diana Travers' cryptic warning all the way here. Relics that weren't just valuable but dangerous. Objects that seemed to have a will of their own. It all sounded like something out of a bad pulp novel. But then again, I'd learned long ago never to dismiss Wolfe's instincts, no matter how bizarre the circumstances seemed. Wolfe, of course, was utterly unaffected by the rain, taking its time as we entered the back room where the museum's archives were stored. The place smelled of dust and old leather, and the shelves were stacked high with tomes, papers, and boxes that hadn't been touched in decades. The silence was oppressive. The kind of silence that seemed to absorb sound, leaving only a sense of isolation in its wake. He didn't speak as he walked through the aisles, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath his shoes. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the familiar furrow of concentration etched on his brow. Wolfe had an uncanny ability to sift through chaos and make sense of it, and I had a feeling this case would require every ounce of that brilliance. So, what exactly are we looking for here? I asked, trying to break the silence. Wolfe paused, then turned to me, his expression impassive. The answer, Archie, is in the details. In every note, every scrap of paper. I want to see how this collection was built, what connections exist between the artifacts, and who has had access to them. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what connections he was referring to. Still, I wasn't about to question Wolfe when his mind was in this particular mode. I moved toward a dusty stack of files, carefully pulling out a few that seemed the most recent. As I flipped through them, I found detailed records of every artifact the museum had ever collected, along with names, dates, and locations where they had been found. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first glance. But Wolfe wasn't interested in the obvious. As I sifted through the papers, I noticed him studying one particular file with a new intensity. He opened it slowly, the creak of the old paper sounding unnervingly loud in the silence. "Here," he muttered, his voice low. "This is where it starts." I moved closer, peering over his shoulder at the file in his hands. It was a detailed ledger of the museum's most prized acquisitions, listing items from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even some more obscure collections from civilizations that most people had forgotten. About the last entry, however, caught my eye. A note, handwritten in a delicate script, marked only with the words, Subject 34. Subject 34, I repeated. What does that mean? Wolfe's brow furrowed. A relic, or perhaps more than a relic. It seems to have come from a source outside the museum's normal acquisitions. The note is dated 20 years ago. No other explanation. We continued flipping through the file, but there were no further details. Wolfe's fingers tapped the edge of the file thoughtfully. That's odd. They didn't even bother to properly catalog it. I looked around the room, trying to make sense of the strange feeling that had begun to settle in my chest. You think it's one of the missing items? It could be, Wolfe replied, his voice as flat as ever. But I have a theory. One that's more dangerous than I'd care to admit. Dangerous how? I asked, instinctively lowering my voice, though there was no one else around. Wolfe's eyes flickered toward the shadowed corners of the archive. The artifact, or artifacts, are not merely valuable because of their age or rarity. I suspect they were collected for a different reason entirely. I think they hold power. Power that someone is willing to kill for. I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. I wasn't used to hearing Wolfe talk about anything supernatural or mystical, but the way he spoke about the relics left me with a creeping sense of unease. It was clear that something larger was at play here, something that went beyond simple theft. As I thought about it, I began to understand what had been bothering me about Diana's visit. She had come across as confident, almost desperate. But there had been something hidden in her eyes, a flicker of fear that she hadn't been able to mask. She was scared, and I was beginning to see why. The next hour passed in silence as Wolfe and I sifted through the remaining files, looking for any sign of a connection. The rain outside had picked up, beating against the windows in a rhythmic, almost hypnotic way. I could hear the occasional sound of a car passing by, but otherwise, it was just us and the dust. As Wolfe read through more documents, he muttered under his breath, occasionally stopping to point out a discrepancy here or there. Then, without warning, Wolfe stood up and moved toward one of the filing cabinets. "Archie, get the flashlight," he said, his voice steady. "I need to see something." I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and handed it to him. Wolfe was already pulling out an old ledger, its spine cracked with age. He opened it carefully, turning the pages with delicate precision. I felt a chill run down my spine as I saw what he was looking at, an old map detailing the location of the museum's foundation, and beneath that, a strange symbol, drawn in ink, marked on the spot where the museum had been built. "This," Wolfe said, "is where it all begins." The symbol was familiar. It was the same symbol Diana had mentioned when we first met, the one she'd seen etched into the walls of the museum's hidden chamber. The realization hit me like a slap in the face. Someone had been leaving clues, deliberate hidden clues, right under the museum's nose. And that symbol, that mark, was the key to understanding what had been going on. But the question now was, who else knew about it, and what were they willing to do to get their hands on the secrets it held? The air felt heavy with anticipation as I turned to Wolfe. "What now?" Wolfe's eyes glinted in the dim light, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Now, Archie, we begin to play the game." "And I intend to win?" What had I gotten myself into? As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, I couldn't help but feel like I was standing on the edge of something far darker than I had anticipated. Chapter 3: The Whispering Manuscript. The clock on the wall ticked with an ominous regularity as we left the dusty confines of the archives behind. I could still hear the murmur of rain against the windows, its rhythmic tapping like an impatient warning. Wolfe hadn't said much since our discovery in the ledger, just enough to make it clear that he was intrigued, though his expression remained unreadable as always. We'd moved quickly from the archives to the museum's private vault, a hidden, temperature-controlled room that housed the most valuable and potentially dangerous artifacts. Diana Travers had been kind enough to show us the way, her reluctance palpable. She hadn't seemed too thrilled at the idea of us poking around her most secure holdings, but Wolfe was persuasive in his own way. As we walked down the dimly lit corridor, the tension between us thickened. Something was changing. Whatever had been unearthed from those ancient shelves was no longer just about theft or lost relics. It was about something far more sinister, and Wolfe, ever the master strategist, was playing his hand close to his chest. The vault door loomed ahead. Diana swiped a card through a sensor, and with a soft hiss, the heavy steel door slowly opened, to reveal the relics, dozens of them laid out in carefully arranged glass cases. To the untrained eye, they looked like ordinary museum pieces. Statues, jewelry, scrolls. But Wolfe's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the room with an intensity that made me uneasy. "There," he said, pointing to a pedestal in the center of the room. I followed his gaze, my heart skipping a beat when I saw what he was indicating. On the pedestal was a manuscript, an ancient leather-bound book that looked far too fragile to exist. Its cover was embossed with strange symbols, faint but undeniably present. Symbols I recognized from the map I uncovered earlier. Diana looked uneasy as she stepped forward, as if she were expecting us to turn away. "That manuscript? It's been in the collection for nearly 30 years. But there's something off about it. It whispers." "Whispers?" I asked, trying to hide my disbelief. Wolfe didn't respond to me, his gaze fixed on the manuscript, his expression intense. "May I?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost too calm. Diana hesitated for a moment, but then stepped aside, allowing him to approach the case. He didn't touch it immediately. Instead, he observed it from a distance, his fingers drumming on the side of his chair. Wolfe had a habit of pacing before making his move, and it seemed that this relic was not one he was willing to treat casually. His eyes flicked to Diana, who was watching nervously. "You said it whispers, Miss Travers," Wolfe said, still not taking his eyes off the book. "Tell me more." Diana shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as though the walls themselves might be listening. "I don't know how to explain it. At night, sometimes we hear sounds coming from the vault. Not voices exactly, but like whispers. Low, almost inaudible, except that they come from the book. We've had the place checked. Nothing. No equipment failure, no hidden speakers, nothing." Wolfe nodded slowly, his mind working behind those unreadable eyes. He was already piecing something together, and I knew better than to interrupt his thought process. His movements were slow and deliberate, as he carefully unlocked the glass case and lifted the manuscript out. The weight of it seemed impossibly light for something so old, as if it was made of air rather than paper. "I'll need a moment, Archie," Wolfe murmured, turning his back to me. I stood by the doorway, watching as he flipped through the pages with the care of a man handling a fine work of art. His face betrayed nothing. No surprise, no hint of recognition, but I could tell that something was off. Wolfe had never been one to hesitate when examining something that piqued his interest, and the way he studied this manuscript told me that it was more than just a curiosity to him. The manuscript was a puzzle, no doubt, but it was clear from Wolfe's demeanor that it was more than that. It had secrets hidden within its pages, and whatever they were, they would not be revealed easily. I crossed the room, standing beside him. "So, what's in there?" I asked softly. Wolfe didn't answer right away, instead taking a moment to turn a few more pages. His fingers brushed the text as if he were reading a hidden code, his brow furrowing with concentration. Finally, he closed the manuscript with a soft snap and turned to face me, his expression grave. "The book is more than just a manuscript, Archie," he said, his voice low and measured. "It's a key." "A key to what?" I asked, my curiosity piqued despite the growing sense of unease settling in my chest. Wolfe's gaze flicked to Diana, then back to me. "A key to the relics. To the power that they possess." I glanced at the manuscript again, my stomach tightening. "What power?" Wolfe took a slow breath, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to me without a word, and I unfolded it slowly. On the page was a sketch. No, a map. a map that was eerily similar to the one we had found earlier in the archives. This map, however, was far more specific. It pointed to a location beneath the museum, an area that hadn't been explored in years. "This is it, Archie," Wolfe said quietly. "The map leads to a chamber beneath this very museum. A chamber where the true relics, if they exist, are kept, and this manuscript is the only thing that can unlock the door." I felt a chill crawl up my spine as the realization sank in. The relics, the manuscript, the map, everything we had uncovered so far had been leading us to this one moment. We weren't just dealing with theft anymore. We were dealing with something far more dangerous. Something hidden beneath the museum, just waiting to be unleashed. I looked at Wolfe, my voice barely a whisper. "What's down there, Wolfe?" Wolfe smiled, the faintest hint of satisfaction tugging at the corners of his lips. "Something that will change everything, Archie." And something that someone is willing to kill for Diana stood silently in the background, her expression one of barely concealed dread. She knew, as we did now, that whatever lay beneath the museum's foundations was not just a relic. It was the heart of a puzzle, a mystery that stretched far beyond the walls of the museum. And as the door to the vault slowly closed behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just uncovered the first layer of a much larger, more terrifying story. The whispers had begun. And from now on, there would be no turning back. Chapter 4: The Vanishing Artifact. The rain had stopped, but the air in the museum was thick with the tension that had settled into my chest ever since we discovered the manuscript and the map. Wolfe, as usual, seemed unperturbed, though I could tell that something in him had shifted. His eyes, focused and calculating, hadn't left the manuscript since we left the vault. It was clear he knew more than he was letting on, and that made me uneasy. As the night grew late, we found ourselves in Wolfe's office, with the map now spread out on his desk. Diana Travers had left earlier, visibly shaken after we told her about the hidden chamber beneath the museum. She hadn't taken kindly to Wolfe's cryptic comments about what lay below, and I couldn't blame her. This case had spiraled into something far darker than I had expected, and now I was beginning to understand why Diana had been so nervous from the start. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of his beloved beer, his eyes never leaving the map. "Archie," he said, breaking the silence. "This relic hunt is not about the artifacts themselves. It never was." I looked up from my own thoughts, meeting his gaze. "Then what's it about, Wolfe?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tapped his fingers rhythmically on the desk, his mind clearly racing. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but full of that undeniable authority. "This is about control, Archie. Whoever has access to the relics beneath the museum has the power to manipulate far more than just objects. They have the means to manipulate history itself, the power to rewrite the past and the future." I felt a chill crawl down my spine at his words, but I didn't interrupt. Wolfe's theories had a way of making the impossible seem inevitable, and I was beginning to realize that the stakes had been raised far beyond mere theft. "I've been thinking," Wolfe continued, "about the artifact that Diana mentioned, the one that whispers. It's not just an object, it's a key. And that key, I suspect, is what unlocks the true power hidden beneath the museum." A shiver ran through me. "You mean the chamber?" Wolfe nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the map. "Exactly. The chamber is the heart of this mystery, and whoever controls it will have the means to control the relics, and all who seek them." I wasn't sure I understood everything Wolfe was saying, but I did know one thing. The situation had become far more dangerous than we had initially thought. Whoever was behind this wasn't simply interested in collecting valuable artifacts. They wanted something far more powerful. And that, I realized, was the part that Diana hadn't been telling us. The next morning, we returned to the museum. The place felt different now. It wasn't just a building full of old things, it was a battleground. Every shadow seemed to hide something. Every corridor seemed to pulse with an eerie energy that wasn't there before. Wolfe led the way, his steps slow and measured, as if he were already 5 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. We made our way back to the vault, the heavy door swinging open with a soft groan as Wolfe entered, his hand resting on the edge of the pedestal that held the manuscript. The relics surrounding us seemed almost to watch as he approached the pedestal with that familiar air of quiet authority. It was clear that this place was no longer just a museum to him. It was a puzzle, a challenge, and Wolfe never backed down from a challenge. I followed him closely, trying to suppress the unease that had settled in my stomach. Something felt off. Something had changed in the last 24 hours, and it wasn't just the weather. And then it happened. I turned away for a split second, just long enough to glance at the other relics around the room. And when I turned back, the manuscript was gone. The pedestal was empty. "Wolfe!" I shouted, but he was already moving, his eyes scanning the room with the cold, calculating gaze. "Where is it? Where's the manuscript?" Wolfe didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked around the pedestal, his footsteps echoing loudly in the otherwise silent vault. He crouched down, examining the floor beneath the pedestal, then straightened up and turned to me. "It's gone," he said, his voice grim. "What do you mean, gone? How can it be gone?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Whoever took it, Archie, knew exactly how to bypass the security. And they knew exactly when to strike. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach." "So, someone's been watching us?" He didn't answer, but I could see the gears turning in his mind. He was already running through a dozen scenarios, none of them good. I wanted to ask him more, but Wolfe was already moving toward the back of the room, his gaze fixed on a small, hidden compartment beneath the far wall. It wasn't a part of the original layout. The compartment was new, and its presence felt wrong. "Check the back, Archie," Wolfe ordered. "There's something here we need to find." I rushed over to the hidden compartment, my heart pounding in my chest. I could already feel the weight of what was coming, the feeling of being trapped, of the walls closing in around me. As I pried open the small metal door, I found something that made my blood run cold. Inside the compartment was a single item, a strange, dark stone, its surface carved with symbols I couldn't recognize. I picked it up carefully, the weight of it both reassuring and terrifying at the same time. "This is it," Wolfe said, his voice low. "This is what they've been after." I felt a surge of confusion. "What is it? What's the connection to the manuscript?" Wolfe didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took the stone from my hand, his fingers brushing against the intricate carvings. His eyes gleamed with something that bordered on excitement. "Not the manuscript, Archie," he said finally. "The stone is the real key. Whoever took the manuscript was simply playing a game. The stone. This is the key to unlocking the chamber beneath the museum." "But what about the manuscript?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. "The manuscript is a decoy," Wolfe said with a soft smile. "A distraction." I stared at him, the realization hitting me like a slap in the face. The manuscript, the one we had thought was the most important piece, was nothing more than a smokescreen. The real power lay in the stone, and whoever had taken it now had the key to the chamber we had been searching for. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. So, who took it? Wolfe's gaze hardened, his jaw set. Whoever it is, they'll be expecting us, but we're going to beat them to it. As we made our way toward the hidden chamber below the museum, I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me. Whoever had taken the manuscript, whoever was behind this, was not someone we could easily outsmart. The game had just become far more dangerous, and I had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. And as I glanced at Wolfe's calm, focused expression, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into a trap. Chapter 5. The Silent Observer. The air was thick with anticipation as Wolfe and I moved down the narrow, dimly lit hallway beneath the Morningside Museum. The walls, lined with exposed brick and damp with age, felt as though they were closing in on us. The cold seemed to seep into my bones, and every creak of the floorboards beneath our feet echoed louder than it should have. I could feel the weight of the relic, the dark stone, pressing in my pocket, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We weren't alone. Wolfe, ever the master of composure, strode ahead with a steady pace, his thick leather gloves covering the stone as if it were a mere trinket. He didn't seem to notice the growing unease in the air, though I could tell that his mind was already piecing together the puzzle. He had a way of quieting the world around him, reducing it to nothing but variables, calculations, and inevitable conclusions. For me, however, the silence only seemed to magnify everything. The creeping shadows, the distant noises that could have been footsteps, or perhaps something else entirely. "We're close," Wolfe said, breaking the silence without looking back. "Very close." I swallowed, trying to steady my nerves. "Close to what?" "The answers," he replied coolly. "And whoever's behind this." We stopped in front of a large metal door, its surface rusted with age and marked with strange symbols, identical to those we had seen in the manuscript. The markings were almost imperceptible to the casual observer, but Wolfe's sharp eyes had already cataloged them. They weren't just decorations. These symbols were a code, a key to the lock that held the secrets of the chamber beyond. "You've been here before?" I asked, eyeing the door with suspicion. "Once," Wolfe said, his voice as dry as ever. "I was invited by someone who wanted to keep their involvement a secret. But I've learned enough since then. This door is more than just a barrier. It's a warning. A warning." The words sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't help but be drawn to the door. The promise of answers, of secrets that had been buried for decades, was too compelling to ignore. And yet, as I stood there, something gnawed at me, a feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Can we open it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Wolfe had never been one to shy away from a challenge. He nodded, his gaze focused intently on the door. "We can, but we'll need the stone. That's the only way this lock will respond." I took a deep breath, pulling the stone from my pocket. It felt heavier now, as though it had absorbed the very air around us, its surface humming with an energy I couldn't quite explain. I stepped forward, holding it out to Wolfe. He accepted it without a word, his fingers brushing against mine in a brief electric contact. For a moment, I wondered if I was imagining it, but the feeling lingered. Something beyond mere coincidence, beyond the artifacts themselves. Wolfe inserted the stone into a small indentation in the door, a precise movement that was almost ritualistic. The stone slid in with a faint click, and for a brief moment nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then a deep rumble echoed from the walls and the door slowly began to shift, its massive weight grinding against the floor with a sound that sent an unsettling jolt through me. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. What was beyond this door? What secrets had been hidden away for so long? The door creaked open to reveal a dark, cavernous space that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was stale and a faint smell of decay and forgotten time hung in the air. It felt as though we had just crossed into another world. Wolfe stepped into the room without hesitation, his expression unreadable. I followed, though every instinct in me screamed to turn back. The room was empty save for a few scattered crates and what appeared to be a large, ornate chest sitting in the center of the room, but even that felt wrong, too carefully placed, too deliberate. "This is it," Wolfe murmured, his voice oddly reverent. "The chamber." I was about to ask what we were supposed to do next when I heard it. A sound, faint at first, but growing louder. Footsteps. Someone else was here. I froze, my pulse quickening. "Wolfe," I whispered, my voice tight with tension. "Someone's in here with us." Wolfe didn't react, his attention still fixed on the chest. His gaze narrowed as if he were deep in thought. "Yes, Archie," he said, his voice calm as ever. "I've been expecting that." I glanced around, trying to peer into the shadows, but it was impossible to see anything beyond the faint light from the cracked door. The footsteps stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the room. I was about to speak again when a voice cut through the stillness. "Well, well," the voice said, low and mocking. "Looks like we finally meet, Mr. Wolfe." The voice was familiar, too familiar. I turned, my heart sinking as a figure stepped out from the shadows, the dim light revealing the face I'd least expected to see. It was Henry Caldwell, the museum's director. He was dressed in black, his features hard and unforgiving, and a cold smile spread across his face as he approached us. "Caldwell," Wolfe said, his voice like steel. "I thought you might be involved." I could feel the tension in the room shift, a palpable energy building between Wolfe and Caldwell. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was the culmination of everything that had been building up in the last few days. The missing relics, the whispered warnings, the mysterious symbols. It was all leading to this moment. "What are you doing here, Caldwell?" I asked, my voice tight with suspicion. "This isn't your museum?" "Not anymore," Caldwell chuckled darkly. "Isn't it?" "I've always been the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, Goodwin. All those years of carefully curating the museum's collection, those were just the beginning. The relics beneath this museum, they belong to me. And now that you've found your way here, it's too late for you to turn back." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, his mind already working. "What do you want with the relics, Caldwell?" Caldwell stepped closer, his smile widening. "What do I want? Power, Mr. Wolfe. Power like you've never imagined. The relics beneath this museum are more than just objects. They're the key to unlocking a force beyond time and space. I've spent years researching, gathering, and waiting. And now, it's finally time to take what's mine." "Power," I said, my mind racing. "But why go to such lengths? Why kill people?" "To control the relics is to control the world," Caldwell said, his voice growing more intense. "And to control the world, you must control history itself. These artifacts, these relics, are more than just ancient objects. They have the power to reshape everything. I intend to harness that power. You, Mr. Wolfe, are merely a nuisance, standing in my way." I looked at Wolfe, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, an emotion that wasn't calculation, but cold fury. Caldwell had been playing a dangerous game, and now we were caught in the crossfire. Wolfe stepped forward, his voice low but full of quiet menace. I think, Caldwell, you've underestimated your opponents. You see, the relics are not yours to control. They are ours to expose. And you... Wolfe's eyes hardened. You are merely the last in a long line of fools who believe they can change the course of history. A long pause hung in the air before Wolfe finally spoke again, his voice dripping with contempt. Let's see who controls what, Mr. Caldwell, Wolfe said. Shall we? The tension in the room was unbearable. Caldwell's grin never faltered, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty behind his eyes. Wolfe had already begun to make his move, and as I glanced at the relics and symbols around us, I realized one thing with chilling clarity. This was just the beginning. Whoever controlled the relics controlled the future. And Caldwell was about to learn just how dangerous it was to underestimate Nero Wolfe. And as the shadows deepened around us, I couldn't help but wonder, would we all make it out alive? Chapter 6. The Collector's Game. The silence that followed Wolfe's confrontation with Caldwell was deafening. I could almost hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears as the tension in the room thickened, hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Caldwell's ever the showman stood there with that infuriating smirk on his face, as if the entire situation were a mere inconvenience to him. His eyes flickered with a mix of triumph and something darker, a hunger I hadn't seen before. Wolfe, on the other hand, seemed completely unaffected. The same calm, calculating composure that had carried him through countless cases was now focused entirely on Caldwell. I had never seen him quite like this. He was always the man in control, always the one with the upper hand, and it was clear that this game had only just begun. So, Caldwell, Wolfe said, his voice soft, almost conversational. You've been collecting these relics for years, haven't you? You've been waiting for the right moment, the right alignment of forces to unlock their true power. Caldwell's grin deepened, a glint of malice flashing in his eyes. You could say that, Wolfe. But unlike you, I don't waste time with trivialities. I understand the true value of these artifacts, and I intend to claim them, once and for all. You think you can control them? Wolfe's tone remained steady, his gaze unwavering. That's a dangerous delusion, Caldwell. Power like that doesn't belong to men like you. For a brief moment, Caldwell's smile faltered, and I could see the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. You don't understand, Wolfe. These relics are not just objects. They are keys to something far greater. I've studied them for years, decoded their secrets, and now I will use them to unlock the true potential of the world. I glanced at Wolfe, who stood there with an almost amused expression on his face, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the stone in his hand. He wasn't buying any of Caldwell's grandiose claims, and neither was I. You've spent your life gathering these relics, Wolfe continued, but you've missed the most important part of the puzzle. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. And what is that, Wolfe? The relics are not meant to be controlled, Wolfe said, his voice low and steady. They are meant to be understood. You've been so focused on power that you've failed to recognize the true purpose of these artifacts. They are not tools to be used. They are messages, clues from another time. And you will never understand them, Caldwell, because you're not looking for the truth. You're only looking for dominance. There was a brief, pregnant pause. The air between us seemed to hum with unspoken tension, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath our feet. Caldwell's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tightening in frustration. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Wolfe. "Enough talk," Caldwell spat, his voice low and dangerous. "I've waited too long for this moment." "And you," he said, turning to me with a look of contempt. "You've been nothing but an obstacle." I felt a cold chill run through me at the venom in his words, but before I could react, Wolfe's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Archie, take a step back," he said calmly, never once taking his eyes off Caldwell. I did as instructed, but not without a sense of foreboding. I could tell Wolfe had something in mind, something we weren't quite privy to yet. As Caldwell continued to pace around the room, muttering about his plans for the relics, I couldn't help but feel that we were no longer just dealing with a simple thief, but someone who had crossed the line into obsession. "Caldwell," Wolfe said, his voice now hardening, "you're about to make a mistake." A very big one. The room seemed to hold its breath as Wolfe took a step forward, his gaze sharp and penetrating. Caldwell's expression faltered for a split second, and that's when Wolfe made his move. In a flash, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object, a delicate, intricately carved piece of wood. I recognized it immediately. The decoder, the key to the puzzle we had been chasing all along. Wolfe had kept it hidden, safe in his possession. He had never truly trusted Caldwell, not even for a moment. Caldwell's eyes widened in realization. You have it?" Wolfe's lips curled into a thin smile. "I don't need to control the relics, Caldwell. I don't need their power. I only need to understand them. And now, I understand everything." Before Caldwell could respond, Wolfe pressed the decoder into the stone that had been sitting on the pedestal. A deep, resonating hum filled the room as the stone began to glow faintly. The symbols etched into its surface shifting, rearranging themselves before our very eyes. It was as if the stone itself had come to life, responding to Wolfe's touch. "What are you doing?" Caldwell hissed, his voice tinged with panic. He took a step forward, but Wolfe held up his hand, signaling for him to stop. "I'm opening the door," Wolfe replied coolly. "The one you've been so desperate to unlock. And I'm going to expose what you've been hiding all these years." The stone pulsed with energy, and suddenly, the walls of the room seemed to shift. A low rumble echoed through the floor, and a section of the far wall slowly began to move, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, bathed in an eerie otherworldly light, were the true relics, the ones Caldwell had been seeking. They weren't just ancient objects or treasures from lost civilizations. No, these were something far more significant. I couldn't quite make sense of them at first, but the energy in the room was unmistakable. These relics were more than mere artifacts. They were conduits, channels to something greater. "Impossible," Caldwell whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This can't be real. This isn't how it was supposed to happen." Wolfe stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unwavering. "You've spent your life collecting pieces of a puzzle you didn't understand." But the real answer, Caldwell, was always here, hidden beneath the surface. These relics were never meant to be used as tools for power. They were meant to reveal a truth that you were too blinded by greed to see. Caldwell's face twisted with rage. "You're wrong, Wolfe. I've done everything to unlock this power. Enough," Wolfe interrupted, his voice cutting through Caldwell's frantic words. "You failed, Caldwell. And now, you'll have to face the consequences." The room seemed to darken as the relics glowed brighter, their energy filling the space with a charged intensity. Caldwell took a step back, his expression one of fear, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Wolfe's words. "You don't understand, do you?" Wolfe said, his voice tinged with something like pity. "These relics are not for your use. They are not meant to be controlled. They are a message, a warning. And now you'll have to face the reality of what you've been chasing." For a long moment, Caldwell said nothing, his gaze fixed on the glowing relics. His eyes were wide, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse with defeat. I never thought it would end like this." Wolfe didn't answer him. He simply turned and walked toward the exit, the decoder still in his hand. "It ends as it was meant to, Caldwell. The collector's game is over." As we made our way back to the surface, the weight of what we had uncovered began to sink in. The relics were not just artifacts, they were messages, warnings from a time long past, and they held a power that none of us could fully understand. Caldwell had been blinded by his own ambition, but Wolfe had seen through it all, unraveling the mystery piece by piece. And now, as we left the chamber behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the true danger was only just beginning. There were more questions than answers, and something told me that this story, this twisted game, was far from over. And as we stepped into the light, I wondered just how far this rabbit hole went. Chapter 7. The Portrait of Betrayal. The cold, indifferent light of the early morning filtered through the narrow windows of Wolfe's office, casting long shadows across the room. The tension from the previous night still hung in the air like smoke, unseen but suffocating. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept replaying the scene in the chamber beneath the museum, the relics, Caldwell's frantic words, and the way Wolfe had outmaneuvered him at every turn. But even now, something about the entire situation gnawed at me. Wolfe, of course, had no such concerns. As usual, he sat in his chair, his legs crossed, a book in his hands, and the faintest trace of a smile playing on his lips. I didn't even have to ask what was going through his mind. I already knew. "I think it's time, Archie," Wolfe said, breaking the silence, his voice as calm and measured as ever. "We have an understanding of the relics, of Caldwell, but there's still one thing left unsaid. We haven't uncovered the full truth. And I suspect the final piece lies with Miss Travers." I straightened, my thoughts instantly shifting. "Diana Travers? You think she's involved?" Wolfe's eyes never left the page in his book, but the slight tightening of his jaw told me everything I needed to know. "I don't think she's just involved, Archie. I think she's been playing us all along." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Diana Travers, curator, guide, the woman who had first brought us into this case, had led us into the belly of the mystery. Had she been playing a game of her own this entire time? But why? I asked, my mind racing. "She's the one who hired us." "She came to you for help." Wolfe set the book down slowly and looked at me, his gaze as sharp as a blade. "Because, Archie, she wanted us to find the relics. She needed us to do exactly what we've done, and now I believe she's ready to collect her prize. We didn't waste any time." Wolfe moved quickly, as he always did when he sensed the end of a case was near. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at me as we made our way to the museum. Diana Travers had seemed so genuine, so frightened when she spoke of the strange occurrences and the missing relics, but Wolfe's words lingered in my mind like a dark cloud. When we arrived at the museum, the place seemed oddly quiet, as if the building itself was holding its breath. We were met by a security guard who led us through the dimly lit corridors, his footsteps echoing unnervingly in the silence. Wolfe didn't speak as we moved through the familiar hallways, his mind undoubtedly already several steps ahead, calculating every move. We reached the curator's office without incident, the door slightly ajar. I felt a sudden rush of unease. Something was off. I had been here with Diana before, but now it felt like an entirely different place. I pushed the door open, and there she was, Diana Travers. She was standing by the window, her back to us. She didn't turn when we entered, but I could feel the tension in the room shift. "Miss Travers," Wolfe said, his voice cool. "I think it's time we had a conversation." She didn't flinch at the sound of his voice, but I could see her shoulders tense. Slowly, she turned to face us. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Something dark, something calculated. "I've been expecting you," she said, her voice smooth. Too smooth. "I knew you'd figure it out sooner or later." Wolfe studied her, his gaze sharp. "You've been playing both sides, haven't you, Miss Travers? You've been using us to find the relics, to bring them into the light. But you never intended to share them." Diana's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I've never been one to share, Mr. Wolfe. And I certainly don't share with amateurs." The word amateurs hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment I thought Wolfe might respond with one of his usual cutting remarks, but he didn't. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes locked onto hers. "You didn't just come to me for help, did you?" Wolfe continued, his voice low. "You knew I would get close to the truth, and you needed me to. You needed to control the narrative, to make sure no one stood in your way." Diana's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't flinch. "You're not as clever as you think, Wolfe. You might have solved the puzzle, but you missed the bigger picture. The relics are not just objects, not just powerful artifacts. They are tools. Tools that, in the right hands, can reshape the world." I stepped forward, a sense of betrayal and anger rising in my chest. "What do you mean, reshape the world? What's your game here, Diana?" Diana didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked across the room to the desk, where a small, ornate box sat under a glass case. She opened it slowly, revealing a collection of strange, ancient objects. Small trinkets, each one more bizarre than the last. Some were carved with symbols I recognized, others were completely unfamiliar. "These relics," she said softly, "are part of something much larger than you realize. They are part of a ritual, a process that has been passed down through centuries. The key to unlocking the true power is hidden in plain sight, right here in this museum." Wolfe didn't flinch, but I could see the flicker of understanding in his eyes. He had known all along that there was something more to Diana's role in this than simply being a curator. She wasn't just a participant in this game, she was the orchestrator. "You've been using Caldwell," Wolfe said, his voice colder now. "You let him think he was the one pulling the strings, but all along it was you who was in control. You were the one manipulating the situation, feeding him information, letting him believe he could unlock the power of the relics." Diana's smile widened, her eyes glinting with a dangerous intensity. "Caldwell was useful for a time, but now he's a liability. He couldn't see beyond his own greed. But me?" She paused, her voice lowering to a whisper. "I see everything. I've always seen everything." I could feel the weight of her words settle around me, thick and suffocating. This wasn't just about relics or power. Diana had been playing a game far beyond anything I had imagined. She hadn't just wanted to collect the relics, she wanted to control them, to control their power. And now that she had everything in place, there was no stopping her. "And now?" I asked, my voice tight with anger. "What happens now, Diana?" She took a step closer, her eyes fixed on Wolfe, and for the first time, I saw something like genuine respect flicker in her gaze. "Now," she said slowly, "you and Mr. Wolfe are going to help me unlock the final piece of the puzzle. Whether you want to or not." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, and I could feel the intensity of the moment crackle in the air. This wasn't just a simple case anymore. It was a battle for control over something far more powerful than we could have ever anticipated. Diana wasn't just a curator, she was the mastermind behind it all. I turned to Wolfe, but his face was unreadable. He wasn't about to let Diana's words rattle him. He had a plan. I could see that in the way he held himself, calm, poised, and calculating. "What will it be, Archie?" Wolfe asked, his voice low and steady. "Will you be a part of history?" I stared at him, the weight of everything settling into my chest. Diana had made her move, and now it was our turn. The stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined, and the game had changed forever. This wasn't just a matter of solving a mystery anymore, it was about survival. And I couldn't shake the feeling that, this time, the price of victory would be much higher than I was willing to pay. Chapter 8. The Web Unraveled. The air felt colder as we stood in Diana's office, the flickering fluorescent lights casting an unsettling glow on her face. There was no mistaking the shift in the atmosphere. The game had moved into dangerous territory, and Diana had just shown her cards. The relics, those cursed artifacts we had been chasing, were no longer just valuable objects. They were keys to something more insidious, something that neither Wolfe nor I could fully comprehend yet. Diana's smirk had disappeared, replaced by an almost serene focus. She stood behind her desk now, watching us with cold, calculating eyes, as though we were nothing more than pieces on a chessboard. I wanted to lunge at her to break the calm she had so carefully constructed, but Wolfe's presence beside me was enough to keep me grounded. He had a plan. He always had a plan. "Well, Wolfe," Diana said, her voice smooth and almost mocking, "what now?" "I've shown you my hand. I trust you've come to the same conclusion I have." Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He was too busy, as usual, studying the scene around him, assessing every detail, every movement. I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Miss Travers," Wolfe said finally, his voice as calm as ever, though the undercurrent of tension was undeniable. "One that, I suspect, is about to come crashing down on you." She tilted her head, an almost imperceptible shift in her posture, but her smile never faltered. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't realize what I'm dealing with?" I glanced at Wolfe. He wasn't taking the bait. He was too composed, too calculated, and I knew he wasn't about to let Diana walk away from this unscathed. But I also knew that we were standing on the edge of something much bigger than we had anticipated, a power that was so ancient and dangerous, it could change everything. Diana stepped away from her desk, the soft click of her heels against the floor echoing in the quiet room. "You've spent your life chasing clues, Wolfe, solving puzzles, uncovering mysteries, but you've never had to face the truth. The truth about the relics, about the power they hold. I couldn't take it any longer." "What truth, Diana?" "What the hell are you talking about?" Diana turned her cold gaze on me, her eyes narrowing. "The relics are not just objects. They're part of a ritual, a plan that's been centuries in the making. The one who controls them controls not just history, but the very fabric of time itself. I froze, the words settling into my mind like lead. Time? I repeated. You're telling me these relics, they can control time? She smiled then, a cruel, knowing smile. Not control it, reshape it, bend it. The relics were created by an ancient civilization, a civilization that understood the true nature of time. They knew how to manipulate the very threads that weave the past, the present, and the future. Wolfe's eyes flashed with understanding, and I could see the wheels of his mind grinding into motion. The relics, they're not just artifacts. They're instruments, tools meant to alter the course of time. Diana nodded slowly, her face illuminated by the faint, unnatural glow of the relics she had so carefully guarded. Exactly. And for centuries, they've been hidden away, lost to history. But now, I've gathered them. I've unlocked their power. I felt the air around me grow thick, the weight of her words pressing down on me. This wasn't just some eccentric archaeologist's dream of finding ancient treasure. Diana wasn't just a curator. She was a woman with a mission. And that mission was to harness something far more dangerous than I had imagined. Wolfe took a slow, deliberate step forward. And you think you can control it? You think you can bend time to your will? Diana's eyes flickered with something like amusement, but there was also something darker there, something hungry. I don't just think I can control it. I will control it, and once I do, the world will be mine to shape. I couldn't stop myself from shaking my head. You're insane, Diana. You really believe you can change history? You really believe this is all just a game to you? Diana's smile faded, and for the first time, I saw the true depth of her obsession. It's not a game, Archie. It's the future. The future that I can create. All the power I need is within my grasp. I exchanged a glance with Wolfe, and I could see the same thought flicker across his face. She's gone too far. We're not going to let you do this, Diana, Wolfe said softly, but there was an edge to his voice now, one that sent a shiver down my spine. You've crossed a line, and you're about to find out that there are consequences for playing with the forces you don't understand. Diana's gaze hardened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She knew she was pushing the limits, but she wasn't about to back down. You think you can stop me? She spat, her voice dripping with venom. You think you can stand in my way? I've been preparing for this moment for years. No one, not you, not Caldwell, not anyone, can stop me now. Wolfe took another step forward, his voice cold and commanding. We'll see about that, Miss Travers. You've underestimated us. Diana stepped back, her fingers brushing against one of the relics on her desk, as if drawing power from it. Underestimate me at your own peril, Mr. Wolfe. The relics are mine. And I will do whatever it takes to unlock their full potential. The room fell silent. For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the relics in the background, their glow pulsating with an eerie rhythm. Wolfe stood motionless, his eyes fixed on Diana. I knew he was considering his next move, weighing his options, but there was something in the air now, a feeling that something had changed. We weren't dealing with just a mastermind anymore. We were dealing with someone who held the keys to something otherworldly. Diana's eyes flicked to the door, and for the briefest moment, I caught the glint of something metallic in the shadows. My heart skipped a beat. It was almost as if she was waiting for something. Wolfe, I whispered, my voice barely audible. We're not alone. He didn't respond, but I saw his fingers twitch ever so slightly, a sign that he was preparing himself for whatever was about to happen. And then, in a flash, the door to the office slammed open. A figure rushed in, moving too quickly for me to react. Before I could even comprehend what was happening, the room exploded into chaos. A man dressed in dark clothing lunged toward Wolfe, a sharp object raised high in his hand. Wolfe barely flinched. In one fluid motion, he sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it with a force that made me wince. The assailant collapsed to the floor with a muffled grunt, disarmed and incapacitated. I rushed forward, my mind spinning, but Wolfe held up a hand, signaling for me to stop. "I told you, Archie," Wolfe said, his voice calm despite the violence that had just unfolded. "This is no longer just about the relics. It's about control. And Miss Travers, I believe you've just made your final mistake." Diana stood there, frozen, her face pale with shock. The man at Wolfe's feet was no ordinary thug. His eyes were wide with fear, and his hands trembled as he reached for a concealed weapon in his coat. "Who sent him?" I asked, my voice sharp. Diana didn't answer immediately. Her face was a mask of fury and panic, and I could see the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. She had underestimated Wolfe, and now it was too late for her to do anything about it. As Wolfe turned toward her, I realized that everything had changed. This wasn't just a case of greed or obsession. It was a battle for control over something much larger, something that could alter the course of history itself. The relics weren't just objects, they were weapons, and the game we had been playing was only just beginning to unravel. And I couldn't help but wonder, would we even survive this game of betrayal? Chapter 9. The Mastermind. Revealed. The air in the museum felt heavier than before, the tension thick as if the building itself were holding its breath. Wolfe's calm demeanor never faltered, but I could see the flicker of determination in his eyes. The man on the floor, Diana Travers's hired muscle, was writhing in pain, his hand clutching his dislocated wrist. But Wolfe barely gave him a second glance. The puzzle pieces were coming together now, and every detail Wolfe had been observing fell into place. The relics, the decoy game Diana had played, the way Caldwell had been manipulated, it was all starting to make sense. Diana, however, looked anything but composed. Her face was pale, her breath shallow, and her fingers were trembling as they brushed the edge of the desk, reaching for something I couldn't quite see. Her earlier arrogance had disappeared, replaced by a cold fear. "You think you've won?" Diana spat, her voice laced with venom. "You think you've solved everything? This is bigger than you, Wolfe. Bigger than you both." I moved closer, my pulse quickening. The desperation in her voice, the fear I was seeing in her eyes, felt different from the woman we had first encountered. She wasn't just a curator anymore. She wasn't just an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire. She had been playing a much more dangerous game. "I don't think I've won," Wolfe said, his voice steady. "But I do believe I've unraveled enough to understand what's really going on here." "Enough to understand what?" Diana challenged, taking a step back, though I noticed she kept glancing toward the door behind her. Wolfe's eyes narrowed as he turned his attention back to the disarmed man on the floor. The man was no longer struggling. His face had drained of color, and he was shaking. Not with pain, but with fear. Fear of something much larger than us. "Who are you?" I demanded, kneeling beside him. He was too frightened to answer at first, but I could see the desperation in his eyes, a desperate longing to escape whatever was about to happen. "Answer him, or I will make it worse," Wolfe added, his voice like ice, sending a chill down my spine. The man finally gave in, his voice cracking as he spoke. I I'm just a hired hand. She paid me to keep you occupied. To stop you from reaching the chamber below Diana? I asked, my voice tight. You hired him? Diana remained silent, but the look on her face was all the confirmation I needed. She had been playing both sides, keeping us in the dark while she slowly pulled the strings of the game. But why? What did she want from the relics? What was she really after? Wolfe's voice broke through my thoughts. You've been working for someone else, haven't you? Someone much more powerful than you, Miss Travers. Someone who doesn't care about the relics themselves. Only what they represent. Diana's eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the mask slip. The fear was no longer hidden in her eyes. It was out in the open now, raw and frantic. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They're coming. They're coming for the relics. Who? Wolfe asked, his voice growing colder. Who's coming for them? Diana stepped back, her hand still trembling as it gripped the edge of the desk. The collectors. The ones who've been gathering these artifacts for centuries. The real power behind all of this. She shook her head, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. They've been watching me. Watching us. And now that I've found what they wanted, they'll do anything to take it back. I felt a chill settle in my chest. The collectors? A shadow organization, one that had been operating for centuries, pulling the strings behind the scenes, using the relics as mere tools for something far more dangerous. The idea sent shivers down my spine. These weren't just collectors. They were orchestrators of history itself. Who are they? I asked, my voice tense. Who are these people you're afraid of? Diana's face twisted in fear as she looked between Wolfe and me, her breath quickening. You're too late. You've already uncovered the relics and they're not going to let you leave with them. They'll stop at nothing. I felt a sudden weight in the room, as though the very air around us had thickened, pressing against my chest. It was as if something was watching us, waiting, poised for the moment when we'd step too far. Wolfe's eyes glinted with something darker now. He didn't seem afraid. In fact, if anything, he seemed more determined than ever. We've already played your game, Miss Travers, Wolfe said, his voice cold. And I think it's time we played it on our terms. Diana took a step back, panic rising in her voice. You don't understand. You don't know who they are, what they'll do. You're playing with forces you can't control. She glanced once more at the door, her eyes wide with fear. They're already here. A sudden noise behind us sent my heart into my throat. The sound of heavy footsteps, almost synchronized, echoed from the hallway outside. I turned to Wolfe, my pulse racing. We're not alone. Wolfe didn't flinch. His expression remained unreadable as always, but his stance was poised, prepared. No, Archie, he said calmly. We're not alone. The door burst open, and a group of men in dark suits stepped into the room. Their faces were cold, expressionless. They moved with precision as though they had been trained for this moment. And in their hands they carried what looked like high-tech devices, almost like scanners or monitors. But the way they moved and operated was unmistakable. Wolfe's eyes never left the men. The collectors, I presume. One of the men stepped forward, his expression devoid of emotion. Mr. Wolfe, he said, his voice flat and cold. You've interfered in something you can't possibly understand. These artifacts are not for you or for anyone else. They belong to the collectors. And now, they're taking them back. A wave of realization hit me like a ton of bricks. These men weren't just thieves. They were a part of something much larger, an organized group, pulling the strings of history, collecting power through these relics. And now, they were about to take everything back. Everything we had uncovered, everything we had worked for. "You've made a terrible mistake," Wolfe said softly, his voice laced with contempt. "I never play by anyone's rules but my own." The man in front of us stepped forward, his cold eyes fixed on Wolfe. "You think you can stop us? You think you can walk out of here with those relics? You're nothing but a nuisance." And we don't tolerate nuisances. I could feel the tension in the air, the impending violence that was about to unfold. But Wolfe was already several steps ahead. Before I could even react, he moved, his body a blur of motion, and in an instant he had disarmed the man, twisting his arm behind his back with a force that made the man cry out in pain. Wolfe's fingers found the collar of his shirt, pulling him close, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't think you understand, gentlemen," Wolfe said, his voice low and threatening. "I'm not the one who's been outplayed here." Before the man could respond, Wolfe had already incapacitated him, and the others froze, unsure of what to do next. Wolfe's eyes flicked to Diana, who had been watching the entire exchange in stunned silence. Her expression was a mix of fear and awe. She realized, too late, that Wolfe was more than just a detective. He was a force to be reckoned with. "Call off your men," Wolfe said coldly, "or the next step in this little game will be yours to play." For the first time in the entire ordeal, Diana looked truly terrified. She stepped back, her eyes darting between the men and Wolfe. She knew deep down that the collectors were not the real threat here. Wolfe had already won. As the dust settled, I could feel the weight of everything Diana had said sinking in. The relics were more than just powerful artifacts. They were the key to something much greater. And the collectors? They weren't just after the relics. They were after control over time itself. But there was one question that still lingered in the air. One that we had yet to answer. What was the real purpose behind the relics? And as I looked at Wolfe, I knew that this story was far from over. The game had only just begun. We had won the battle. But the war? The war was still ahead of us. Chapter 10. The Final Relic. The museum was eerily silent as Wolfe and I stood in the heart of the chamber beneath the building, the relics glowing faintly around us. The once lively hum of the museum above felt like a world away. Now, we stood at the edge of a secret that had been buried for centuries, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something enormous was about to unfold. The relics, those strange, powerful objects Diana had spent her life curating, now sat before us. More than just curiosities or artifacts. They were the keys to something far darker, something that no one, not even Wolfe, fully understood. Diana had been right about one thing. We had opened the door to a truth far beyond anything we had imagined. And the people who had followed us into this chamber were not just after the relics themselves. They were after what the relics could unlock, the power to manipulate history, to change the very fabric of time. Wolfe's gaze never wavered from the relics as he moved to the center of the room, his hands folded behind his back. The tension in the air had thickened, and I couldn't help but glance over at the unconscious men we had taken down earlier. They were still bound, still waiting to be dealt with. But their presence felt irrelevant now. The real battle wasn't with them. It was with the forces that had been manipulating us from the shadows all along. "You understand, Archie?" Wolfe began, his voice low, almost contemplative. We've been chasing the wrong thing. It's never been about the relics themselves. It's been about what they represent. What they represent, I repeated, still processing everything that had happened. You're talking about the power to reshape history. To control time itself, Wolfe nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the glowing relics. Precisely. And Diana, in her obsession, miscalculated. She thought she could control them, but she failed to see the bigger picture. I stepped closer to Wolfe, my heart pounding as I tried to make sense of everything. But she's gone, Wolfe. She's... No. Wolfe interrupted, his voice sharp. She's not gone, Archie. She's only just begun. It was a chilling thought, and the air seemed to grow colder as Wolfe's words sunk in. Diana was still out there, somewhere, manipulating the relics, probably gathering strength for the next phase of her plan. She was the one who had orchestrated this entire game, but now, as I watched Wolfe, I realized she was a mere pawn in a much larger scheme. There's something we've overlooked. Wolfe continued, his voice steady but filled with urgency. We've been playing right into their hands. All along, they've known we'd uncover the relics. They've been waiting for this moment, waiting for the right people to activate them. Who? I asked, my mind spinning. Who's been waiting for this? Wolfe didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the relics, his gaze narrowing as he studied the intricate symbols carved into their surfaces. Then, with a slight pause, he finally spoke, his voice laced with something darker than I'd ever heard before. The collectors. They aren't just after the relics, they are after the knowledge they hold. The knowledge to rewrite the past. I felt a cold weight in my chest as the truth of his words hit me. The collectors weren't merely thieves. They were ancient manipulators, the ones who had planted the seeds of this game. They weren't just seeking power, they were seeking something more profound, control over time itself. And we're the ones who've walked right into their trap, I muttered, my voice thick with disbelief. Wolfe nodded. That's right, Archie. The relics are not just objects. They are keys to something much more dangerous than we ever thought possible. And now the question is, can we stop it? Before I could respond, a voice interrupted us, a familiar voice laced with mockery and regret. I wouldn't be so sure about that, Mr. Wolfe, came the voice, cold and venomous. I spun around, my heart racing as Diana stepped into the room, her expression one of calm determination. She wasn't alone. Standing behind her were several more of the men in dark suits, their faces expressionless, as if they were part of a larger, faceless organization. So, you finally understand, Diana said, her voice smooth, almost triumphant. You've played your part. Now it's time for me to finish mine. I stepped forward, my hand instinctively reaching for my gun, but Wolfe stopped me with a single sharp glance. He was already calculating his next move, already thinking several steps ahead. You've made a grave mistake, Diana, Wolfe said, his voice steady but firm. You think you've won. But you're wrong. The relics don't belong to you. They never did. Diana's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. You still don't get it, do you? The relics were never meant for you to understand, Wolfe. They were meant for me to control. And now that I have them, there's nothing you can do to stop me. A feeling of unease settled in my stomach as I looked between Wolfe and Diana. This was the moment. The culmination of everything we'd uncovered. The relics were no longer just ancient artifacts. They were a part of something bigger, something that could reshape the course of history itself. Diana stepped forward, her fingers brushing the nearest relic. As her touch met its surface, the room seemed to hum with energy. The air grew heavy, charged, as if something vast and ancient was awakening. "This is it, Mr. Wolfe," Diana said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of power and madness. "The final piece of the puzzle. The key to unlocking time itself." I took a step back, the realization dawning on me. The relics weren't just relics. They were time-altering devices, tools capable of rewriting history, changing the past, and bending the future to Diana's will. "You've already lost," Diana continued, her voice low and menacing. "The collectors are waiting for me. They'll help me unlock the full potential of the relics. Together we'll change everything." I could see Wolfe's eyes narrowing, his thoughts racing as he assessed the situation. He was always 3 steps ahead, and I had to trust that he had a plan. But for the first time, I felt the weight of our predicament, the danger we were facing. Diana was on the verge of something catastrophic, and we were standing in her way. Without warning, Wolfe stepped forward, his voice cutting through the thick tension in the air. "You're not in control, Diana," Wolfe said, his tone hard and unyielding. "You think you understand the relics, but you don't. You don't even know what they're capable of." Diana paused, her hand hovering over the relic as she turned to face him. "What are you talking about?" Wolfe's lips curled into a thin, knowing smile. "You've been so focused on power, so focused on control, that you failed to see the real danger of these relics. You think they can be manipulated, you think they can be used to rewrite history, but they can't." For a brief moment, I saw the flicker of doubt in Diana's eyes. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. She was beginning to understand that she had been outplayed, that the power she thought she controlled was far more dangerous than she could comprehend. Before she could react, Wolfe turned to me, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "Archie, we need to stop her now. The relics are starting to activate, and if we don't act quickly..." I didn't need him to finish. I reached for the stone, the final key. And before Diana could stop us, I slammed it into the center relic. A sharp, blinding flash filled the room, and for a moment everything went silent. Time itself seemed to stretch, distorting in ways I couldn't begin to understand. And then, as quickly as it had started, it stopped. The relics fell still. Diana stumbled back, her face a mask of disbelief. "No, it's not possible." Wolfe stepped forward, his eyes cold and unwavering. "You never understood them, Diana. You never understood the true purpose of the relics." She took a step back, her expression shifting between anger and confusion. "What did you do?" Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He simply turned toward the men who had been standing silently behind her, their faces frozen in fear. "You're done, Diana," Wolfe said quietly. "You never had control. And now you'll have to answer for everything you've done." As the room fell silent, the relics, those ancient powerful objects, sat still before us. Their glow had dimmed, their power contained. We had stopped Diana's plan, but I could feel the weight of what we had just averted. The danger had passed for now, but I knew it was far from over. This was just one chapter in a much larger story, a story that was far from finished. And as we left the chamber, the cold air of the museum no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a warning. The relics were still out there, and somewhere, someone would always be watching, waiting for the next move in the game we'd only just begun.